A very warm welcome. You're joining us at Hyde Park on Other Derana 24. The United States has imposed 30% reciprocal tariffs on Sri Lanka and decided on how the United States is going to work with the rest of the world in terms of imposing tariffs and how these goods enter the United States. But what does this mean for Sri Lanka? The Sri Lankan apparel industry, tea and all our export products. I've invited to our studios a key partner of the former government and a negotiator who was involved in Sri Lanka's negotiations with the International Monetary Fund during the economic crisis to secure an extended fund facility for Sri Lanka. Former Minister of Foreign Affairs, President's Counsel Ali Sabry. You were former Finance Minister and previously Justice Minister as well. Thank you very much for your time here.
Thank you for having
Hyde
us.
Park. We also have with us economist Talal Rafi joining us here at Hyde Park to talk about how our export basket could be diversified, how we can move forward given the tight tariff situation. Joining us again this week at Hyde Park, we have Chief Research Officer of the Geopolitical cartographer Dinouk Colombage, who'll talk about geopolitics and Sri Lanka's way out of this situation. Let's start off with Minister Sabry. What could Sri Lanka have done different? From 44% to 30%, it sounds like an achievement that Sri Lanka has secured, the government has secured in terms of negotiations. But this still is a major blow on Sri Lanka's apparels, our tea, rubber, all that is destined to the US.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, a very interesting discussion. I think we should have this kind of discussion so that different opinions come out. I think 30% is going to be a heavy blow on us. Yes, from 44% to 30% is some achievement. You must give them the credit. But the issue is not that. Issue is how our competitors have done with it. So we don't have the full control of what the US are going to do it, because tariff per se is not good for the world trade, free trade, and that will affect countries like Sri Lanka, because ultimately, whatever they say, consumer has to pay. So when the prices go up, demand will reduce, and as a result of the entire world will suffer that. But the most important thing is not what 30% what Sri Lanka has achieved, what our competitors have achieved. That's the issue is. For example, if we have to pay 30%, and if Indonesia is only paying 19%.
They were able to negotiate down from a massive 40-something.
47% or so. And then Vietnam is paying 20%. And if India also comes below 20%, that's going to be a massive hit on Sri Lanka, because most of our, probably 70% of our stuff that we are exporting there, including the apparel, rubber, coconut and all those things, those competitive countries are also doing it. So therefore it's important that we're trying to secure something less than 20% or on par, at least if you can't get below the others, but on par with the others, otherwise we are going to be in trouble. So therefore I think for your questions, whether we could have done anything better than this, I think we could have prepared in advance, we could have lobbied it more. Because the way American politics works today, not today, for a long, long period of time, it depends solely on lobbying. So lobbying is a part and parcel of their decision making.
Is that what you would have done different? How would you have really
no, I think to be fair by our team there, I mean our ambassador, Mr. Mahinda Samarasinghe, is a very skillful officer. He had done a lot of good work during my period of time also when we were there under President Ranil Wickremesinghe. He was a very able officer, but that alone is not good enough. Sometimes it is ambassador level, then comes the foreign minister, then comes the trade minister, then comes the cabinet, and thereafter the head of state. So lobbying is all part of that. We could have done a little more lobbying than what we used to do, or what we have done so far, but still not too late. We have a window of opportunity till the 1st of August. So I hope that they will look at it carefully. So rather than finding fault, at the end of the day, it's our country. If our country does well, I mean, so does all of us. and otherwise anything goes wrong. Therefore, important thing is to quickly learn and then reinvigorate our effort more and more. And if there is a possibility of further lobbying at that point in time, to pursue that. And today morning I saw President Trump has said that he is not going to go after heavily on the small countries. For about 150 countries, he said that it will be about 10 to 12% or something, 10 no, little more than 10. So if he can bring that down into that, probably, and show us as also a small country, though they are our biggest export partner, and come into a smaller player comparatively, which depend on the US tariff, is good thing to do. I think we should continue to negotiate on that. And one other thing, but I think we have not been brought into the surface. I don't know how it would have been played or not. It's not always the tariff. The trade deficit is only one part of it. There is something called current account. For example, though Sri Lanka export a lot of goods to US, there is so many things other than direct trade to Sri Lanka, which money flows into US. For example, our Google subscription, our Apple subscription, our probably AI subscriptions, and for 44 or 45% of, Talal may know the real number, of our entire budget for the year goes to service interest on our loan. Most of those interest, the loans have been loaned to Sri Lanka by either US banks or syndicates of the US banks and the bondholders. So all those things taken into account, the difference between our tariff, the trade deficit between our country and others, when you transform that into a current account, it's not that bad. So we need to emphasize that during the negotiation. I hope they would have done that also.
Talal, I think as Minister said, you'll have maybe some statistics to share with us as well. But essentially, how do countries negotiate? What kind of edge do we have when we negotiate with these countries? What leverage do you think Sri Lanka should offer a country like the United States when we're really going to negotiations for such tariffs?
Right. Thanks for having me, Indeewari. So to start off, what do we have? We have a couple of things which we can play off. If you look at Trump's letter to the Sri Lankan president, he mentions that we have treated them unfairly. So the deficit is definitely not something to be unfair about, because that's something that's natural. But what he means is also that we have put quite high tariffs on them, that's duties and others, and also para-tariffs, non-tariff barriers. So to be very honest, though I'm a Sri Lankan, I must say that on that point, he is telling the truth. So what do we have to bargain? Some say we don't have much to bargain. We still have something. We can reduce para-tariffs on US goods. So eliminating para-tariffs is anyway part of the IMF program. So we have to do it in 2 years anyways. So just do it in the next 2 weeks and get it done with. So it's just common sense. The other thing is reducing tariffs, customs, others. See, Vietnam got it from 46% to 20%. That was the steepest negotiation. That is because they offered American goods duty-free to come into the country. So currently, we export around 300 to 400, import around 300 to 400 million dollars worth of American goods, while we export around 3 billion. So almost 10 times do it. So even if we do it duty free, there's hardly any American products that we are going to buy, or it's going to like. So even if it doubles, it's only going to be a 300 million dollar hit on the current account. But if there is even a 25% fall from exports to the US, that's going to be a $750 million dollar hit to the current account, which is the most important, especially when we have to build reserves. Right. So I think the government has these two cards to play. And adding on to the minister's points, there is also other factors on which I can elaborate later, which is that, we say that Indonesia got 19%, Vietnam got 20%. India is very likely to get below 20%. But at the same time, these governments have fiscal space. They are also going to give incentives. Vietnam, I'm pretty sure, will give incentives to its exporters. Indonesia would. India has a huge a reserve of $600 billion. They are going to also incentivize. So the effect of even a 20% on India, Indonesia, Vietnam is going to be quite little. But here, unfortunately, due to the situation, we have almost no fiscal space to give any sort of incentives. So that is one key area. The other point is we also have to be very careful. Trump has warned any new taxes would get a counter thing. So right now we are proposing this 18% digital tax. So it's only going to, this digital tax, which is mostly going to affect American companies, which are quite close to the Trump administration, it's only going to add 0.04% GDP to our government revenue, which is almost around 30 to 40 million US dollars, which is quite little. You can try to get it from somewhere else. Even if you privatize Hilton, you got your answer. So this is not the time to push him towards a retaliation. So I think we have a number of different cards to play. But knowing, if I were to tell one point to the negotiating team, I think sympathy won't work, because Trump, if you read his Art of the Deal and others, he is somebody who is known to even smell weakness in people, and he will grab on that. So we have to, I'm not saying we have to go with strength, but we have to offer something. He's a businessman. He wants to see what he can gain out of Sri Lanka. So.
Certainly. Dinouk, I'd like to turn to you. With the kind of research analysis that you have, what can you share with us, especially we're talking about the constraints to supply chain because of the global wars. Sri Lanka, a key geopolitical position we are in, but yet affected by all these conflicts. And here we're talking about tariffs now. How do you think Sri Lanka's Vision 2048 previously is going to be affected by the present situation?
It will be affected to a great extent in that, as you rightly said, you know, the entire global supply chain is being knocked out of whack by the current tariffs that Donald Trump has introduced. However, we also have to remember that one of the key aspects of Vision 2048 that the former president brought in was a shift of our focus from Europe and America to Asia. He wanted to realign Sri Lanka, bring it into that Asian market. Now, when you look at the tariffs, when you look at the way it's been come across, so far there's only been 3 countries that have come to some sort of agreement with Donald Trump: Vietnam, Indonesia, and the UK. China and the US are in a sort of holding pattern right now on the tariff war. But the rest of Asia is still circling. They're still trying to decide how we're going to bring this on. Japan, South Korea, they're not backing down. Malaysia, Singapore, they're going back to their books. They're looking at it. So Sri Lanka also needs to look at this situation and decide, where does our future markets lie? As it was pointed out, yes, the US is our largest trading partner right now. However, what are we trading to the US, and is there a future in that? Apparel, over almost $2 billion of our trade goes to the US is made up of apparel. Now, Vietnam's tariffs have dropped down to 20%. They're our largest competitor. Indonesia, I mean, their apparel is $4 billion plus to the US. India also is going to be lower than 20%, we assume. Their apparel industry is going to overtake us. Bangladesh, even though right now they're above us, the sheer quantity of what they export to the US dwarfs Sri Lanka. So we have to really ask the question, is apparel and the US our future markets? Or do we look at diversifying our markets, bringing us into a greater Asia focus, and ensuring that there's a new, stronger foundation for our industries? We have to look at, take the Singaporean model. When they first started, they were very much focused on a manufacturing economy, which is what Sri Lanka is right now. But they have moved past that to a knowledge-based, service-based economy. Sri Lanka also needs to look at that. The last 2 years, 2 or 3 years, there's been a far greater emphasis on converting Sri Lanka's economy into a logistics hub. Now, if that happens, it means that Sri Lanka will no longer be overly dependent on 1 or 2 individual markets, but rather we will play a bigger role in facilitating the global trade, and it places us at a far more advantageous position in that sense. So definitely, outlook, if we were to continue down this same path, is not looking good, but we have before us a situation that can or should in theory, speed up what we were trying to achieve under the Vision 2048, which is realignment to Asia.
Certainly. Former Minister Ali Sabry, you were negotiating, a part of the negotiating team to secure the IMF deal. Now, there has been a number of prerequisites and conditions laid out by the IMF, which Sri Lanka, although we believed Sri Lanka may renegotiate, we didn't see much of a change. However, we just have 2.5 years left until 2028 when we have to start our debt service obligations. How is this going to play out, especially when our foreign exchange earnings are going to be hit? And I'd also like to hear from you our legal matters. We spoke about the Economic Transformation Act, setting out how we fulfill our commitments to the IMF, but there are a number of other obligations that Sri Lanka has to fulfill, although the IMF says Sri Lanka is on track.
Yeah, I think that's a very good question. Basically, are we on track? Yes, up to last year, I would say that we were on track, because when you go down the kind of economic debacle what we went through in 2022, we knew that it will take a little bit of time to get over. There are three stages of a recovery. First of all, you prevent further downhill of the economy at that point in time. So you just, what we do, that's why we had to increase our interest rates. We have to suspend the foreign loan payment. So you try to prevent further destruction of our economy. We did very well, and that's how, because at that time our focus was to fight the inflation, which was at 70%. So that pace we managed in 6 to 8 months by actually suspending imports and also by restricting consumption of the electricity, water, the electricity, and also the petrol and diesel. We introduced those things. So thereafter we knew it's the stability part of it. That is with the IMF loan coming in, World Bank is coming in, ADB is coming in, and that stage. But with that we can live forever. We live by 2028. Once the prices go up, very seldom that you manage to bring it down. So what you do? What you do is to improve your economy and improve your growth, and with growth you improve the people's income. So to catch up with the inflation which have already gone up. Though the inflation had under control, but the prices which went up in 2022 had not come down. That's why your pocket, what probably you earn, whatever the money, today not worth the amount of money what you earned in 2022, today is about probably 60% of the worth. So unless your salary also have been increased by 40%, your lifestyle standard have come down. So only way to do that is to improve the economy. How do you improve the economy? That's why we were having that Economic Transformation Act. We were trying to procure a lot of investment coming from outside, and also we were looking at strongly advocating decentralizing, deregulating the lands and giving to the people, public the land, rather than government holding on to the land, because a majority of the land in the country is still with the state. So they are not giving it to anyone else, and they are not doing anything either. So, along with that, the single window. Now, all those things have come to standstill, unfortunately, whether we like it or not. Only the biggest investment we canvassed with lot of effort, Adani's investment, 600 million worth of it, have gone back. Can you tell me, for the last 10 months, there is a single large new investment coming into the country? Absolutely nothing. So therefore, growth has not taken place, though they promise so many things, unfortunately. Now, we being primarily a Sri Lankan, we love our country. It doesn't matter who runs the country as long as they run properly. But if you try to put back the country again, now it happened in various times. It happened in 2015. Once the new government came at that time, they suspended the port city. Chinese freezed their economy, and economy went down, and it became 1.8% or something, just above Afghanistan by 2018, 2019. So then we learned from that. People make mistake, but you are going through the same pace again. Investigation after investigation, nobody is saying not. But if the decisions are not made, nothing will move. So you can't send a fear psychosis on the people who are destined to take decisions. I mean, being a cabinet minister, I know we can give instructions, but I can't sign as on behalf of the government. It's the secretary or somebody who is signing it into a contract or anything. So unless and until the bureaucracy sit with you, align with your vision and take decisions, nothing will work. So 1 year ago, unfortunately, this alignment is not taking place, growth is not taking place, and I'm worried, if you look at it, the reserves are now down to about 6 billion. Yeah. So reserve by end of this year, we need to have 8.5 billion of reserves. 7 billion reserve. So how are we going to get that? So by the time we pay in 2028, we need to have sufficient reserves to support. In terms of the IMF, how much we need to have it by 2028? 12 billion.
13 billion by 2027. Yeah.
In end of 2027, so we just have 2.5 years. Are we on track with that? So no one can say that we did not know these parameters. Everyone knew these parameters. That is why when the IMF agreement came in, we put to the parliament, we debated it. We went for a vote, because no one can say that they did not know about it. This government also knew about it, and they kind of criticized everything. Now ultimately they have to go along with it. But if that is so, they must understand what are their obligations. So unless we build our resources and our reserves, we will have a difficult time. In order to do that, you need to attract investment. Investments are not going to come unless you have a clear roadmap, ease of doing business, single window, and your bureaucrats take decisions. So that's not happening, unfortunately.
Talal, I think you'll have something to add to this as well. We've been talking about inflation. Although it's under control, prices have not settled to pre-crisis levels. But is this possible? When we talk about economics, how does the curve sort of like settle? And in terms of taxation, Sri Lanka, the general public has not had the practice of paying taxes, but taxes are imposed. Here we are paying taxes, but do we really have the return for what we pay to the state? And how are we going to really look at now post 2028? What is the plan now? And if we fail our obligations that are coming up in 2028, what are the repercussions for the Sri Lankan economy?
Right. One thing I'd start off with is we all focus on 28, but the truth is we need to have, by the end of this year, reserves have to be over $7 billion. End of next year, $9 billion. But end of 2027, it has to be $13 billion. So you see, from January 27 to December 27, we have to go up by $4 billion US. So that means
that is
the reserves.
This year. Sorry,
no,
2027.
2027,
yes.
January to,
yes,
January 9 billion, December it has to be 13 billion. So there has to be a $4 billion increase.
Sure.
So how are we going to do that? That is a question. Because one is exports, I don't think we can increase at that level because we haven't got any new sectors or anything. Imports we can't curtail. Imagine curtailing $4 billion worth of imports when 80% is intermediate goods. That will collapse the economy. Other thing is bilateral we can't. We got $4 billion at the worst of the crisis from India. I don't think India or any country is going to keep giving $4 billion every year, or China or the US or anyone else. Multilaterals also, the option is gone because the World Bank, ADB, they don't have the capacity and we are a middle income country. So the last thing is not that I favor this, we have to go back to the bond markets starting early 2027. That's the hard truth that Sri Lankans need to know. There's no other, this is not a permanent solution. Of course, in the early 2030s, we need to get our exports up so that we gradually need to come away from borrowing from bond markets. But in 27, we have no other choice. That is the only way, as far as I know, unless miraculously we increase our exports or some. But that is also tough in the global environment because Trump's tariffs and others are going to cause a global slowdown. And we have a lot of other countries like Bangladesh and others competing for the EU market, for the Japanese market. So we have to be extremely competitive to move into those. So it's quite a gloomy picture. But the other point also I want to mention is about stability. You see, whenever we ask about how are we going to face 28, the answer is sometimes we are following the IMF program, we are overperforming on macroeconomic stability. You see, macroeconomic stability we already had during President Kumaratunga's time for 11 years. We had it during the Yahapalana time to a large extent. We had it during Mahinda Rajapaksa's times. So macroeconomic stability doesn't get you into the growth mode. It's like, for example, you have to, I'll simplify it in a story-like thing. You're supposed to win a 100-meter race, and you've just come out of the ICU, and they ask you, how are you going to win? And you say, you know, I went, the doctor said I'm overperforming on my blood sugar, overperforming on my cholesterol, and my all the other health indicators are great. That doesn't help you. You see, the IMF's role is to get you stable, like get your basics right, absolute basics. So IMF program doesn't help you. You see, that's the role of the World Bank and the ADB, to get the growth on. So that we can't, just saying we are following the IMF program and everything is fine, that is extremely good, because without stability you can't have growth. I mean, you can't run a race when your blood pressure is high. So that is true. But having your blood pressure right doesn't mean that you're going to win the race. So you have to switch to a large extent, and I can follow on. There are some of the structural reforms that are needed, which have to be done. Definitely, these you do this, the growth will only start in another few years. There is no immediate solution other than what I proposed.
Dinouk, you'd have something to add to this from a geopolitical context as well. But essentially, Sri Lanka, who do we look to now? India, with the Adani project, we managed to really drive them out of Sri Lanka. But in Sri Lanka's defense too, Sri Lanka says there were certain conditions, certain price negotiations that were necessary. So how do we really balance this now? There's India. We're talking about not being able to go back to ask for $4 billion from India. But who do we look to if this is the foreign exchange situation for Sri Lanka? When we need to raise foreign exchange, we're hit by reciprocal tariffs as well.
So Sri Lanka, I think first and foremost, we need to get out of this mindset that we need to go around the world asking for help. If you take the African continent, you know, in the early 2000s, they told the rest of the world, look, we don't want handouts, we want to do business. China was the first country to then jump in there, and they're doing business. You know, the West, America and Europe can say what they want, but business is happening between the African states and China. Similarly, Sri Lanka also needs to go down that path. India stepped up when we were in the midst of the economic crisis, and they gave us that $4 billion, which I think everyone in the country is ultimately grateful for. But to move forward, that's not the answer. We can't go to India, or we can't go to China, America, anyone, and ask them to give us further bailouts. We have to look at actually making sure that we can stand on our own 2 feet. Adani's project, yeah, there were questions over it. A responsible government had to come in and immediately say, look, there were concerns raised. We're a new government. We want to discuss this with you. Let's clear up whatever ambiguities there are, and let's move forward with this. Instead, we saw the president, while he was on the campaign trail, going around the country saying he's going to cancel it. He then comes in, and there's a lot of feet dragging. So obviously, Adani will, and his team would assume that they're canceling it, and they pull the trigger first. Now, with the Adani project, that was almost $1 billion we lost there in investment. But we're not looking at, there's another almost $1.5 billion worth of smaller renewable energy projects that have also been lost because the government hasn't taken the bold step to continue what the former government was doing in terms of the energy sector and diversifying ourselves. Now, that's one avenue. The second avenue is we got to look to open out our markets. We have to look to integrating our economies with the regional economies. India was the first and foremost target for us. ECTA, we were in the final stages of negotiations, and now that has fallen by the wayside. Had we brought that in, there's over 1 billion person market there for the Sri Lankan sellers. I mean, we don't need to have this fear that the Indians are going to come down and take over all the jobs in Sri Lanka. There's not enough jobs. Our economy is nowhere near attractive enough for Indians to want to leave India and come here. But if we played it right, we would have been able to make full use of the growing Indian market. Similarly, our energy. Energy was one of our biggest, or is our golden bullet in that sense. Between 40 to 70 gigawatts of renewable energy is available to the country. We were exploring the transmission connectivity line with India. We were exploring the oil pipeline connectivity with India. We would have suddenly have been in a situation where India, who is going to face energy shortages in the coming years, being reliant on Sri Lanka for energy. Suddenly we are in a position where we are not asking, but we are giving. Look, Sri Lanka has a history of taking bold decisions when it comes to trade deals. 1952, under the Rubber Rice Pact, Sri Lanka went ahead when the rest of the world was turning its back on China, and we did the deal. We were facing a foreign exchange shortage at that point. We were facing rice shortage at that point. We had the rubber, we did the deal. Now the rest of America and all who was in conflict with China at that time, they tried to dictate to us not to go ahead with it. We weren't part of the UN, so we said no. And Sri Lanka was the first country outside of the communist bloc to do a trade deal with China. So we have a history of going against the tide in that sense and pulling forward. In this situation also, let's look at it. So India is certainly there. China is also there. China is looking at coming into our energy market. Sinopec, I mean, I know this government claims responsibility for it, but the Sinopec agreement was done well before they came in. But yet again, that project has now come to a standstill. When the president went to China this year, he made it a big tamasha about announcing that they have signed this agreement with Sinopec. Since then, nothing has come forward. So the question is, how are we going to expand our markets? How are we going to integrate within the region? And also the question needs to be asked of the government, are they bold enough to do that? Or are they just going to allow status quo to go on and for us to limp along until, well, as Talal said, 2028, we're going to really face problems.
Right. I think it's time we go for a short commercial break. But before we do, I'd like to ask Mr. Sabry, really, who are we leaning towards now? Is it India, China? Because for a long time we were talking about how we are going into a debt trap with more Chinese involvement in Sri Lanka, and then too much Indian influence was really a concern in Sri Lanka. And then the United States and its proposals with the Millennium Development Corporation, we were worried about Sri Lanka's territorial integrity, sovereignty. But can we really take sides, or who are we really leaning towards now? At this current present moment?
Yeah, this is a very moment of truth for us. We need to talk to the public the reality of the situation, and basically we shouldn't lean to anyone. We must be always multi-aligned. There are opportunities for us. For example, if China, a lot of people are looking at not decoupling. Decoupling is impossible. If somebody is India, if US and China is trying to decouple it, it's bad for India. The China is bad for US. It's not going to happen. But de-risking is taking place. That means they don't want to rely on one country for supply chain. So that is where that China plus one initiative will be very, very important for us. Sri Lanka could relocate when some of the factories from China are relocating. For example, Apple is relocating to India. So when they do some other areas and all those things, Sri Lanka could offer as a very important, because of our location and kind of a English-speaking jurisdiction here and the rule of law and things like that. And therefore, that's an area we should do that. I said that I also propose that we should have another EPZ kind of a thing for targeting probably the American market or the European market for them to come and set up their manufacturing facility. But as Dinouk very correctly point out, all these things depend on how easy to do business in Sri Lanka, how fast we'll clear the things, and how energy are costing us. Unfortunately, all the energy projects, for example, during the last 2-3 years, we managed to break through the monopoly of the CEB and got a new law coming in, made it easy for people to come and invest it, and there's a surge of investment only that. What are they going to do now? What has been agreed and signed in the PPAs for 34 rupees is there on their own, going and reducing it to 18 rupees and 19 rupees. And people who have invested on that, some of them are huge national funds. For example, the Norwegian sovereign funds, all of them have been asked to reduce that. And they have worked on this for 2 years, signed the PPA about 1 year ago, halfway through, about to deliver, they are reducing it to 18 rupees. Dangerous thing. And mind you, still only 70% are the renewable energy. 30% comes from the other source of energy. Some other energies, they are still paying 110 rupees, 115 rupees for fossil fuel. So they are not bothered about paying that 115 rupees and 120 rupees. They are very, very worried about paying 26 rupees and asking them to pay 19 rupees. So unless you top up your renewable energy, you will still pay that 115, 120 rupees. So there is a mafia working. Government, whether they like it or not, either they understand or not, I don't know, they are playing into it. The diesel mafia is very active. That 30% they are somehow rather secured it. They are continue to paying it. Now, for example, Adanis were to pay 26 rupees or so. Yeah. So they wanted to reduce it to 19 rupees. But if had the Adanis come, what would have been the first issue is for us to prevent that 110 and 115 rupees what we pay for diesel, all those things. So look at the difference. So unless we have proper regulations here, one-stop window for clearance, decisions are being taken, digitization is taking place, no one is going to come and invest here. So investment, you need to fight for investment like anything else. That is through the deregulations, that is through marketing. So I think that need to take place immediately. Otherwise we will miss this opportunity also. There is a huge opportunity here. I see that this is a crisis. With this crisis there is danger as well as opportunity. Opportunity is for us to place in such a way that we are a country we can work with both East and the West. We have always been traditionally an unaligned country. Make use of that opportunity for all players to come and set up their manufacturing node, service or whatever it is here. Thank you.
I remember this conversation with you when we met at Hyde Park previously too, about how Sri Lanka can transform a crisis into opportunity. We'll take a short break here at Hyde Park and return. We're talking about US tariffs in Sri Lanka and Sri Lankan exports and how we're going to manage our economy going forward. Welcome back. We're discussing US tariffs on Sri Lanka and the Sri Lankan economy. Mr. Sabry, I think it's important to also focus on your earlier comments as we moved into a short break. You mentioned about the ease of doing business, but we'd like to go back to how Sri Lanka really missed the bus many decades ago in transforming into an education hub where foreign exchange earnings would have been a major component of setting up an education hub in Sri Lanka. And now India has taken the opportunity to become a digital, a more innovative IT hub in our region, with Hyderabad transforming in the last 10 to 15 years. But it's not just about whether Sri Lanka missed the bus, but how are we going to now rectify this, at least to attract the spillover of these major investments coming into places like Hyderabad and Malaysia for education at least. What reforms do we look at? This is open to the entire panel.
I think it's a very interesting issue. I think we have still had the opportunity, particularly President Ranil Wickremesinghe used to always say that there are 5 southern states of India, Tamil Nadu, Andhra Pradesh, Kerala, all, I mean, put together, they have about 300 million the population and very close to Sri Lanka. And their GDP per capita had overtaken ours. You know, it's not the same. In 2015, probably Sri Lanka was about $4,000 and Tamil Nadu was $1,900. Now they are looking at by 2030 for about $10,000. So there cannot be migration from there to here. It has to be migration from here to there. So therefore, I think we cannot be prisoners of the past. Something has happened in the past with the India and all those things. That shouldn't define our presence and the future. We need to be open here. So India, Tamil Nadu is looking at a 1 trillion economy by 2030. So it's a huge opportunity for Sri Lanka. So you need to plug in there. So it's, if you carefully look at it, I have always been telling it is the region which has developed, European Union, Gulf countries, ASEAN, Greater China, America. So this is India's opportunity. India's opportunity, unless we cash in, we are losing the biggest opportunity in the history of our country, just like we did it in early 60s when we lost ASEAN. No, they say that President Sukarno was waiting for Prime Minister Dudley Senanayake to come there and sign the ASEAN. We would have been up on the deal, and he didn't go because there was protest here. So government comes, other side protests. So this thing should end, and we must understand that India has nothing to take from Sri Lanka. India's economy is now about 5 trillion. Yeah, 5 trillion. And how are we? We have 87 billion and probably about 100 billion. So much more for India, for us to benefit than India to benefit. So we need to get in there, and we need to educate the public. We shouldn't play politics with it. If, for example, if the European countries, which fought the First and the Second World War, fought among the Europeans, Italians, French, and the British and the Germans. But after the Second World War, they realized you can't go on like this. The French foreign minister came out with this plan of Schuman plan, and as a result of which today we can see that everybody benefited. And this is that time for Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka need to come out of this cocoon that we have been here for a long period of time, open and become realistic to the world, and then start working in the region, not only with India, but ASEAN, APEC, as well as with China and Middle East, and we must open. The moment we sign the free trade agreement, they come and say that we are trying to sell the country. That's not so. We are opening a new huge market. Chinese have made this. If you carefully look at it, study the Chinese and ASEAN agreement, free trade, ever since they signed that free trade, it has grown maybe 100 times now. So big. And that is why, though US introduced this tariff targeting China, not targeting us, no, initially, if you carefully look at it, the April and May statistic, Chinese economy, though come down to US by 15%, overall have risen by 5 to 7%. They have expected this in advance. They have mitigatory factors in there. They reroute it through different places, and their economy, their export have grown by 5 to 7% despite coming down on US export. So something to learn for us, Talal.
Definitely. Talal, Dinouk,
just answering the question on the reforms, I'll just give I think Sri Lankans don't know this, but in 1948, ours was the second best economy in Asia. So under Prime Minister D.S. Senanayake. So there is a thing in the early 1950s when the IMF and World Bank team were here, and somebody has gone and told Prime Minister D.S. Senanayake that IMF and World Bank want to meet you. He had said, I don't have time to meet them. So the thing is, also another fact that's forgotten is the first finance minister of Sri Lanka was J.R. Jayawardena. So we were doing extremely well, and the reason was at that time between 48 and the mid 50s we had a very liberal trade policy, little government intervention. So that model worked. Everything changed with a change of policy. I mean, the globe changed. I mean, with Argentina's Raul Prebisch, he promoted import substitution. India went down that path. Then Sri Lanka took another turn in 1956 with the election of SWRD Bandaranaike. So that's when we shifted towards a socialist import substitution model, from which we never really came out. So regarding, I agree with the minister, the greatest opportunity would be India, because if you look region-wise, the lowest amount of trade between countries is South Asia. It's around 6%. Even sub-Saharan Africa, there is 22% of the average trade between each other. That is also largely, as I mentioned, due to history of import substitution, inward-looking policies in all these countries. Sri Lanka was the first to open up. So the answer is India. I mean, like the minister said, Tamil Nadu by 2034 is expected to be a $1 trillion economy. And if it grows as it's growing, as I wrote in a paper, by the early 2040s, Tamil Nadu's economy will be larger than Russia's economy. So that's what we are looking at. So that is the potential to grow. I mean, we all talk about Dubai and Singapore. Dubai grew because it was the gateway to the Gulf countries, and Singapore because it was the gateway to the ASEAN. So we can be the sort of thing to India. India wants us to integrate. It's just about us willing to do it. And as the minister said, I mean, look, quite frankly, India has nothing much to gain. I mean, India is now a large player. It's not the India of the 90s. Today's India is playing with the US, China, and others on the world stage. So India is not that concerned to really try to do something here in Sri Lanka, as we're all suspicious of. It's just that it's a win-win situation to everyone. So the thing in Sri Lanka, it's not just the government, but also I've seen it is in the private sector. I used to work with startups also. There the mindset is, some people say, we don't want investments, rather we will try to get a loan or something because it reduces our ownership. This whole mindset. So if you look at countries like the Silicon Valley, I mean the US and others, Zuckerberg, he has a very small share of Facebook. That was because he was able to sell equity in order to expand. It's a win-win for us and for the, like that, of course, if we want to have 100% ownership of every single sector, we are not going to grow. If a foreigner wants to invest, he has to win. I mean, he's not running a charity to come here and just not do anything for profit. Of course, they want profit. That's why, I mean, these are not government entities. These are private sector entities. They have loans to pay. They struggled as entrepreneurs to come. So they're not just going to come and invest in Sri Lanka and expect no return. So they also want profits. We profit off them, not only through investments and jobs, but we learn skills. Those act as a certificate for future investments. So these are some of the things that have to be done.
Dinouk?
Yeah, I think what both the Minister and Talal have said is absolutely right. But first we need to prepare our economy to move out to these areas. And I think one of the biggest areas that we are falling behind is our education. If you look at Sri Lanka right now, our highest export earner is apparel, which is a fairly low-skilled industry that is, as we go along, is going to become more and more mechanized, which is going to mean that there's going to anyway be, there's a expiry date on that industry in terms of manpower. In our agriculture, it's our tea industry, again a low-skill industry for our people. Most of our youth now are looking to go overseas and work in menial jobs rather than stay here and build up the local economy. And the biggest reason we have this issue is because we suffered a brain drain in 2022 during the economic crisis. And on top of that, we don't have the ability to lift up the education and the educated youth in the country. And one of the biggest problems is this absolute aversion that Sri Lankans have to private education. Let's take KDU. When this government came in, they stopped the intake of private students. Then suddenly they reversed that decision, increasing it by 5 million rupees, saying that they're not paying enough. Now we don't know where this government honestly stands on private education. They've spent the last 2 to 3 decades in opposition fighting against private education. Now they're coming, they've opened a front against KDU. They're now starting a war against SLIT. So what's going to happen in terms of private education? In the last 3 years, the government of the time was very much focused on bringing in private education institutions into the country. We were in discussions with institutions from America and Europe and even Asia, with the idea that the first and foremost, we had to stop the brain drain in the country. As it was mentioned, India is there, South India is there, the market is there. But what are we actually taking across to that market that we can bring back foreign earnings for the country? Our energy sector, the engineers were worried about us liberalizing the energy sector and bringing in private players. But let's be honest, there's nothing to worry about simply because there isn't the competition in the market for their jobs. Until we get to that position where there is competition within the market that will see the natural growth of industries, the energy sector, they need to let go of this ownership and this continual clinging on to state ownership. Once that happens and our energy sector expands, the South Indian market is there for the taking. Sri Lanka's biggest problem was this whole want for state ownership. Land reform in the 70s was the worst thing that happened to the country's agriculture sector. It destroyed the big plantation companies. It handed them over to the state, and now most of them are just lying idle. When companies come in and they want to invest in this, there's protests on the street. These foreign companies that are coming to invest in in agriculture are not going to take these plots of land and go back to their own country. They're going to need workers. We have the workers. There's going to be earnings from the tax revenue. So open out the economy first and foremost. Bring in the private sector to our key areas such as education, energy, agriculture. make sure that the local economy is well suited and there's a strong foundation that will allow us then to naturally spread out into markets such as South India.
I think it's time we turn to the final remarks. Open question. We Dinouk touched on state-owned enterprises, but I think this was a key area that was discussed during the previous regime as well. But Minister, you mentioned about the digital tax, and I'd like you to focus on these during your final remarks. This is open to the entire panel. Despite the geopolitical situation, how Sri Lanka is really going to look at the opportunity that you spoke about as we move out of this crisis and secure better investments and foreign exchange earnings to the country?
I think we must grab this opportunity. There is a lot of work we could do. Most of these things we have discussed already. But like anything else, you must canvas for investment. Investment won't just come. So because in 1977, with President Jayawardena opened the Sri Lankan economy in the region, he was the first country to do so. So a lot of people were coming in. Now almost all the countries have opened up. They're huge, intense competition. So you need to better them. How do you do that? Your deregulation, bureaucracy has to be efficient, investment need to be welcome, and sequence is on timing. For example, digital taxation needs to come, but I don't think this is the time. We are in the middle of a massive tariff war with the US, and you try and introduce that, they can reciprocate it, and we are too small to take that on. So therefore, the other thing is you need to identify the psychology of the leader of US right now. You need to play with it. Then you have to, you had to probably massage the ego, can't help, and that's how it works, So therefore, it's important at this point in time we understand this gravity of the situation, and in the meantime, digitization need to quickly come in. I think there is something happening. I hope that that will roll out quickly. Deregulation and privatization of the properties to the private sector to come and improve on that, and then set up some specialized economic zones and all those things. And in the meantime, growth need to take place. Without growth, only way is to, what we have done up to 2022, we always had this loan since early 50s. You kind of borrowed a larger loan and paid the smaller loan. And we went on and on and on until a point in time saying that we are not going to lend you because your ratings have come down and you don't have the capacity to repay. That's where we defaulted. So in order to prevent that in 2028, 29, 2030, we need to quickly start this thing. Overnight, I don't think people will come and invest this way, but at least you start the process. Somewhere down the line, it will work. But government, I always have maintained this, government shouldn't and cannot do business.
My comments, I'd just like to say about because I already spoke about the digital tax. I'll just mention that while negotiating, we have to put forward what's best for us. And also what Sri Lanka needs to know is we are negotiating not with any country. The US is probably the most powerful country of all time. So they have a very large economy and deep capital markets. For example, just giving comparisons, the US capital market is around 40 trillion. China's is only 6 trillion. The US dollar, 60% of central bank reserves are dollars. The yuan, by comparison, is just 2%. So even China being the second power is still not up to the level to challenge the US at the global level. So what we have to do is, as the minister said, be realistic. We have some cards to play, like the para-tariffs, elimination, the duties, like how Vietnam has done, and definitely not go with the 18% digital tax at this time. But at the same time, to leave this on a more optimistic note, we have a lot of space to grow. That is the structural reforms. For example, SOE reforms that will give us, because one argument I'll just mention here, people say some SOEs are profitable. But that's not the question. It is like how much capital is allocated in that SOE which could have been put to use in another area. Like for example, let's say Hilton or Rupavahini. I'm not saying we should privatize them, but how much capital is in them? Can this be used to set up 2 new universities? Because only 10% of our school leavers can get into a state university. That's one thing. Trade reforms, the single window, that's absolutely essential. Regulatory reforms. For an SME, according to studies, about 30% of costs are admin regulatory costs. You eliminate this, you almost eliminate the effects of the tariff. So structural reforms are absolutely essential. Land reforms, 80% of land is owned by the government. Labor reforms. So once you do all this, these are things that the economy will naturally grow. So these are things that are holding back. So we are not like a developed country which has we have played all the options and we are in a situation. We have a lot of cards to play in what the IMF refers to as structural reforms. And if we do that, I think there is light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I agree to this extent that, you know, we are right now in a tariff war with the strongest economy, the largest country in the world. However, we also have to ask the question, how far are we willing to go with our negotiations? Indonesia yesterday got their deal done with Trump. What did they give for it? 50 Boeing planes, $15 billion worth of energy purchases, $4.5 billion worth of agriculture purchases. Is Sri Lanka able to give something like that also? How far are we ready to go to ensure that our tariffs are reduced to the minimum level that Trump is willing to go? Or are we going to throw the baby out with the bathwater to get what we want from America? And what is the knock-on effect? We are still to see what card China plays. Vietnam has given in. Indonesia has given in. We'll put India aside for the time being. We don't know what Europe's going to do. Europe has already they've done their deal with China. Now only they're coming to the US. So Sri Lanka has to also just play this a little smart. Personally, the first thing we should have done before we went to the States was we should have gone around the region and canvassed the neighboring states. Vietnam, Cambodia, Bangladesh, Indonesia, Malaysia. We should have gone and we should have attempted to present some sort of united front to America in negotiating the tariffs. Sri Lanka is no stranger to building up a common consensus. We did it in 2001 at the Tokyo Donor Conference to our benefit. 2022, we got the creditors committee together, again to our benefit. In this case, it wasn't only to Sri Lanka's benefit, it would have been to all the countries' benefits. So I think in that situation, we have now missed the bus there. So we need to, in the next 2 weeks before the August 1st deadline, we need to look at exactly how far we're willing to negotiate and how much are we willing to take on in terms of tariffs, and how are we going to balance that out in terms of diversifying our markets. What is the most realistic targets we can set in terms of that area as well. So.
Thank you very much for your time. But Minister, before we wrap up, really does Sri Lanka have the capacity to give anything in return as big as Indonesia or Vietnam has offered to the United States?
I think we have. I mean, don't underestimate Sri Lanka, Sri Lanka's location, Sri Lanka's people. And Sri Lanka has always punched above its weight in internationally. Sri Lanka is highly respected. If you play your cards properly, I know that, I have been in the highest offices, Sri Lanka is highly respected. Sri Lanka's location is highly respected. If you play our cards properly, we have a lot to offer and we could emerge as a winner. So I'm an optimist always, even during the darkest hours of the country. I'm an optimist. My love is for the country. I'm sure if we play our cards well, we can emerge as a victorious out of this crisis that we are going through right now.
Thank you very much. We're indeed humbled by your presence here at Hyde Park once again. We were joined by President's Counsel Ali Sabry, former Minister of Foreign Affairs, former Minister of Justice between 2024 and Minister of Finance in 2022 again. We also had with us economist Talal Rafi joining us here. Thank you very much for your time here at Hyde Park as well. We also had Dinouk Colombage, Chief Research Officer for the Geopolitical cartographer, joining us here at Hyde Park. Thank you very much. We were talking about Sri Lanka's economy, the new Trump tariffs imposed on Sri Lanka, and how we're going to move ahead. We'll see you again next week with yet another discussion. Good night.